A shocking truth you might not want to admit is that living without boundaries is one of the enemy's favorite open doors into your life, because when you don't define what is allowed and what is not, you silently permit the darkness to creep in, and it happens so subtly that you don't even notice the spiritual erosion until your peace is fractured and your purpose feels hijacked. You think you're being easygoing or loving, but secretly you're bleeding strength, because without boundaries, you absorb everyone's emotions, expectations, and problems until your spirit feels diluted. And this is the first spiritual danger, identity distortion, where you wake up one day realizing you've drifted from the person God designed you to be, the way Psalm 139 speaks of being fearfully and wonderfully made, yet your life no longer resembles the shape God gave your soul. And the second danger rises just as quietly, misplaced loyalty, where you stay attached to people God has already released you from, binding yourself to their chaos and calling it compassion, forgetting that even Jesus walked away from certain crowds when their intentions were wrong, and you start compromising your standards because you think you're helping, but in reality, you're sinking with them, violating the wisdom of Proverbs 4:23 to guard your heart. The third danger is spiritual exhaustion, the kind that feels noble on the surface because you're pouring into everyone. Yet underneath, you know you're running on fumes, spiritually dehydrated, disconnected from the well of living water Jesus promised. And the enemy loves this because he knows a tired believer is an easier target than a wicked man. Tired believers pray less, discern less, and question themselves more, leaving room for confusion to masquerade as conviction. Then comes the fourth danger, the hidden one most people never see until it's too late. Emotional manipulation, where people begin to recognize that you have no boundaries and start shaping your decisions with guilt, pressure, or spiritual language that isn't from God. And suddenly you're obeying voices that sound holy but carry no truth. And this is why 1 John 4:1 warns you to test every spirit, because not every influence in your life is heaven sent, and without boundaries you cannot distinguish between divine assignment and demonic distraction. But the fifth danger is perhaps the most severe, losing spiritual authority, because authority requires alignment, and alignment requires intention, and intention requires boundaries. And when you live boundaryless, you live reactionary, constantly responding to people instead of responding to God, drifting from your calling, the way Samson drifted from his strength when he kept giving pieces of himself to someone who was never meant to hold that access. A warning that access is sacred, and whoever gets it shapes your destiny. And here is the hidden pattern behind all these dangers. Every time you fail to set a boundary, you unintentionally set a precedent, teaching others how to treat you while simultaneously teaching your flesh what to tolerate. And the spiritual realm takes note of what you permit, because what you allow becomes a doorway, and what you allow repeatedly becomes a stronghold. You don't realize this at first because the erosion is progressive. The enemy rarely kicks the door down. He waits for you to leave it cracked open through small compromises, saying yes when your spirit says no, letting chaos call you back when God calls you forward, or sacrificing peace to maintain relationships God has already judged. And over time you begin to feel the weight of living outside the boundaries God designed for your protection. You feel it in your emotions, your clarity, your prayer life, your sleep, your sense of direction. Because boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are gates that determine what is worthy of entering your life and what must stay outside to preserve your assignment. And deep down, you know this because every moment you've ever stepped outside your God-given boundaries has left a residue of regret, conviction, or spiritual heaviness. And every time you've obeyed the voice of God by setting a healthy boundary, you've felt a sudden surge of peace, boldness, an alignment, reminding you that obedience always carries power. That's why the enemy hates when you establish boundaries, because a believer with boundaries is a believer who cannot be controlled, drained, manipulated, or derailed. And the moment you begin to define what you allow, heaven begins to defend what you protect. Just as Isaiah 54:17 reminds you that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. But it also implies you must stop weaponizing your own life by giving enemies access to areas they were never meant to touch. And perhaps the most shocking truth of all is that every boundary you set is an act of spiritual warfare, because it forces darkness to retreat and demands that everything in your life align with God's order. And the spirit within you strengthens whenever you say no to what drains you and yes to what God ordains. So the real challenge you face today is not whether people will accept your boundaries, but whether you will honor the calling God placed on your life enough to protect it, guard it, and refuse to let anyone, your past, your guilt, your fears, or your desire to please, trespass into the sacred space God is shaping within you, because spiritual maturity isn't proven by how much you tolerate, but by how much you refuse to allow when it threatens what God is building in you. And if you truly want to walk in purpose, peace, and authority, you must decide, starting now, to stop living without boundaries and start living with the courage to defend the destiny heaven entrusted to you.